Hello and welcome back to the Bitcoin Cash podcast, following Bitcoin Cash on its rise to global reserve currency. Today is episode 6. We're going to be talking about the transaction flippening and adoption. It's the 21st of February 2021, and I'm here with Matt. Matt, how are you doing, man?
I'm great. It's pretty late, but feeling good.
Yeah, time zones, eh? Global currency, Australia to London. Canberra to London, yeah. So what's your story with cryptocurrency? Give us a bit of a rundown. What do you do? How did you get involved? Why are you on this podcast?
Well, I'm a almost total noob. Well, I can't quite say that, but I had my first memory of it is in 2011. I heard a podcast about Bitcoin, and it was like $1 at the time or something, and it sounded like a very cool concept, and then basically didn't hear about it at all until somebody where we used to work started their own token, and I got involved in that. So I got my first wallet to buy some of their tokens on their ICO, and that's all that. I did.
What token is it? You know, you can you can.
Oh yeah, that's REN.
Yeah, REN.
REN.
Yeah.
So I knew the founders, and I hired them actually previously at my startup, and so I bought a bit of that, and then just had a bit of Ethereum left over, and that's all I have. I don't think I have Bitcoin even. And then the Bitcoin Cash thing, I don't understand at all, but I know it has really hardcore fans like yourself. So I'd heard about the hardcore fans before, and then found out that you were a hardcore fan. And so, yeah, I just thought I'd like to learn more about it. So that could be fun to do live on an episode.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because you came to me and you said, hey, look, if, we were just chatting and you said, oh, listen, if you need somebody to be on an episode to like convince them to buy Bitcoin Cash, I'm willing to be that person. And I found that really, really interesting because on each episode, I try and have a bit of a theme, right? And one thing that this podcast I think is focused on that is maybe a bit of a different angle on cryptocurrencies, that I have very little interest actually in convincing anybody to buy Bitcoin Cash, specifically to buy it as well, just because one of the big, it's not exactly a problem, but it is an aspect of cryptocurrency, is this sort of evangelistic nature of it, right? Where people go out, and even though it's not a scam or a Ponzi scheme or anything like that, it is just a legitimate technology, and it is a new form of money which only happens in the entire planet, once every 1,000 years or something. So it's not exactly something people are used to. But once it, when it does happen, even though it's not a scam, there is still sort of a profit incentive. So when you go out, you tell somebody, oh, buy this shit, like, and it's like, why do you want me to buy it? Well, because I've got it, and then it will go up in value. And that's immediately just that same cycle of like, it's a scam, or somebody else is trying to get me into it for their own reasons. That's good. Well, it's good for cryptocurrency in the sense that it has pre-built marketing, right? Because people are incentivized to spread it around, kind of like a social network or like anything that has a network effect. But I really think it's quite unfortunate, and we can see right now in the current split between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash as well, that there's a very big difference between trying to get other people to buy in and creating a use case for them. Like, for instance, the classic one was buying drugs on the Silk Road, right? Where you're not trying to sell somebody, oh, this is an investment where we're going to be millionaires. It's like, well, you want to make these trades, don't you? This is a tool that can do that for you. And the other thing I think about, we'll talk about it a little bit later on as well, is, to me, it's not because there's hundreds of cryptocurrencies and all this different stuff, and people get into it, and really, if you, at a surface level, they're all pretty much not that different from each other. So if you hype somebody up, like based on the price or whatever, and they buy some, and then the price goes up, and then maybe it goes down, well, immediately they start feeling terrible, and maybe they switch to a different currency, or they change their mind, or they whatever. And there's this whole series of like hard-won battles that you have to go through when you get into cryptocurrency, until eventually, in my mind, you get to the bottom of the process and you realize, right, Bitcoin Cash is the one. But that's my personal opinion. And I think what you're saying about Bitcoin Cash having a lot of hardcore supporters, that for me, that it is because in that sort of funnel where people get into it because their mate hyped up this crypto or because Bitcoin was going up or whatever, and then as it slowly sort of filters into them, they sort of get down to Bitcoin Cash, right? I don't think you find a lot of people who are in Bitcoin Cash who previously liked some other kind of currency, but there's not many people who are like, I was all about Bitcoin Cash, and then I swapped over and went to Bitcoin or I went to Ethereum or whatever. That generally doesn't happen. People who are in this currency are hardcore about it, and because they've been interested for a very long time. And there's also a lot of very high productivity type members. Like there's a lot of developers and a lot of like people running businesses and stuff relative to the percentage of just, idle speculators or casually interested people. So yeah, I guess we'll get to that, but I think that is a huge aspect of it. So yeah, we'll see.
All right, keen to learn
how that comes along. All right, so firstly, we have to talk about the price. Again, I do this at the start of every episode, even though, like I say, I don't think it's so much about the price, but the point of having it, to be honest, is as a bit of a historical record. I think when people come back and the whole point of this podcast as well is that people can look back as time goes on, back to 1 month ago, 1 year ago, whatever, and see, look, what was on the mind of the community at that point in time? What was, the circumstances around it in crypto or in the world? I don't throw too much outside news in because it's not really relevant directly, but I think just following the price, like for instance, today it was about $696 and it was up to about $750, but I did my last podcast last week. It was, $500, right? So it's gone up, nearly 30% in this 1 week, and there'll be some weeks where it goes down 30% as well, for sure, like at one point or another. But so I think as people listen to these podcasts, especially if they like maybe binged, narrative them, once there was a few episodes they kind of came into it later, it would help them adjust to the idea that there is so much insane volatility. And I'm going to do an episode about volatility and all the aspects of how you can handle that individually. For a lot of people that get into it and it's really, screwing with their emotions because people aren't used to having even the most, hyped up penny stock or whatever is still basically peanuts compared to cryptocurrency.
Yeah. See, that volatility thing was, I had a real use case for a cryptocurrency at my company. We had programmers that were working with for a very long time, and then some bank disagreed with a bank, or PayPal changed their policies, and we could no longer send money to Kosovo, the country they're in. Yeah. And it was almost impossible to send money there, and I could not believe that in 2021 it was so hard to send money because PayPal didn't do it. So a lot of those internet avenues, that was the only internet avenue we had. So I had to find some just money transfer company that's probably taking us for a total ride. But I thought, well, maybe we should just pay him in Bitcoin. That'd be way better. But the volatility, and I wasn't sure about that, and I wasn't sure where to load that volatility on. Because would they accept a salary in something that could be volatile, or we can't take the risk of paying something that would go. We can't pay them in Bitcoin, right? And then the value goes up 100 times, and we can't meet it. So, so that was funny. That was a real use case, and I looked into it, but I had to go through the terrible money transfer stuff. That's where I ended up.
Yeah, there are some workarounds for that in the sense of. Like one very interesting aspect. So one way to do it is you just use Bitcoin, or in this case probably Bitcoin Cash, because it would be so expensive on Bitcoin. It would be $10 a transaction minimum. But let's say you're going to use Bitcoin Cash, then you could do it where, well, if you had a coordinated time, then it's like you buy the Bitcoin Cash, you ping it over to them, and then they sell it on the other end, and then all you need is you have to have a gateway from your fiat currency to your cryptocurrency, and then if they have the same on their end, or however, whatever service, you just use the Bitcoin Cash as the payment rail, and then provided you have a set time, then obviously there's only going to be a minimum amount of volatility within 10 minutes, right? Even at the most volatile times in 10 minutes, it's still it's
Yeah.
still relatively contained. So that's one idea. But there are also services that are trying to solve these kind of problems, right? There's one called
There must be.
Any Hedge, which is really good, which is this idea that you can lock your coins to a certain fiat value. So you are holding in Bitcoin Cash, but as the value goes up, look, let's just bring them up. I'm not an expert on this by any stretch of the imagination, but hang on. Any hedge plans, yeah. Bitcoin Cash. Goodness. Any hedge. Here we go. Right. But the idea is that if you you have this sort of setup, where is it here? Get started, how it works. They have a little thing that shows you. Okay, this kind of thing, right? So basically, this is a bit technical, but the idea is that you can put in what currency you want. So let's say US dollars, but you can also do it against Bitcoin or against gold. And I'm sure they'll be adding more stuff in here. And then you can say how much volatility you want, basically. So you could go with like 0% volatility, or you could go with 100%. If you're using 100%, you wouldn't even use this service, right? But let's say you went maybe 50%, right? So if Bitcoin goes up $2, well, you would make $1, but you would have a certain, floor that is guaranteed in your price. And the point is that there's two sides to this trade. So one person can lock in their value as, I want exactly $100 worth of Bitcoin Cash, and then the other person is basically a speculator. People want to trade on margin against the price of Bitcoin Cash, and so they want to borrow somebody's Bitcoin Cash and then pay back collateral if they get it wrong, right? So in that way, you have two people getting a service that they want, where one person is getting Bitcoin Cash locked at a stable rate, and the other person is getting the opportunity to speculate on the price of crypto, which people do on exchanges all the time anyway, right? And they will even pay a margin fee to borrow that currency so that they can short it or whatever. And if they are doing that, then they will pay an interest fee for that. So the person who's locking their Bitcoin Cash at a certain amount of fiat or any denominated value can also get paid interest for doing so. So this is, there are things like that out there, right?
Then that's the other issue. I mean, there's just so many new things. It's so fluid. So many new things getting invented every day. It's so exciting. I'm a huge optimist when it comes to this stuff. I could totally see it taking over the world, but I don't know much about Bitcoin Cash specifically.
I mean, there's.
I'll let you get on.
Well, there's so many hundreds of options. I mean, there's no agenda, dude. Like we just talk about whatever comes up, right? So this is obviously I've been following this story, and like I was saying with the episodes. Today's February 21st. My first episode I think was about 1 month ago. And if you have a look at that is like down here, right? So the difference, and I said that first episode was about basically this graph in large part, where you can see, Bitcoin Cash had gone from basically jack all to getting to actually suddenly seeing this growth in transactions. And I predicted that it would keep kicking off and it would surpass, regular Bitcoin BTC. And that's what we've seen in under 1 month, right? This is obviously a pretty quick growth, and for the last week or so, every day, this last day technically it was slightly below, but for all these days, Bitcoin Cash has done more transactions than Bitcoin, right? So I mean, obviously there's a lot of factors involved in that, right? So we'll discuss that.
That's the flippening. This has been flipped upside down.
That's the idea, right? So is that it came from, again, the first episode sort of has all this in detail. So you can check that out to get a very long explanation of it. But the short thing is that there's this idea in crypto that one coin could flip another, like in transactions or in like market cap is the classic one, right? So if we look on here we go. If we look on coinmarketcap.com and you have a look at the top 10 rankings, well, then one coin would be like, oh, we flipped, this other coin, right? Let's say like, oh, look, see, Binance coin, they've just flipped Polkadot because now they're number 3 and these guys are number 4, right? So it's a little bit tribal, to be honest, and a little bit of, it's a bit like sports-like almost, my team scored more points than your team, kind of an idea. But
But couldn't it just be couldn't it just be a result of cheaper transaction
Well,
costs or something?
exactly.
Or maybe that's what holding
Yeah,
Bitcoin back. They're too
exactly,
expensive.
exactly. So
Yeah, right.
that's sort of all factors in this dynamic, right? Is that if you are, well, it depends on how you look at it, right? If you are a Bitcoin BTC proponent, then you can say, well, Bitcoin is obviously more valuable than Bitcoin Cash, which it is also true. The price is higher because the fact that people are willing to pay $10 transaction fees shows that it's so much better that they will, that they will pay that cost in order to have the larger, more
Yeah.
secure network, kind of an idea. And then people who are on the Bitcoin Cash side of affairs will say, well, look, it's not like people are not using Bitcoin because the transaction fees are that high. If they were lower, that would actually be better. That would go with everything else that was better about Bitcoin Core in their mind, right? And that was why the two coins split off, because there's sort of divergent approach in philosophy. So, for instance, and okay, so we're gonna get to this, but basically the difference as well between the two in price is currently enormous, but the utility between the two, because of the obviously with a lower transaction fee, more commerce is going to happen. That's just a fact, right? If you have if you and I were going to make a trade for $1, I guess we could use Bitcoin, but we're not exactly going to pay $10 to send you $1, and then you can't even send it anywhere because it would cost, you need to put in another $9 even to send it, right? So all of that potential economic activity just doesn't occur in BTC Core, and has now found its kind of home in Bitcoin Cash. And then in my projection, or my prediction, is that obviously you start small, and once you've captured that small market, there's no like cap on Bitcoin Cash. There's a floor on Bitcoin Core, but there's no cap. So obviously it starts eating up the smaller transactions, and then once that's all happening, well, people don't want to switch just to do a bigger transaction. It doesn't really make any sense. So then they start doing the bigger ones and the big ones and the big ones. And historically, this is how Bitcoin, the original one, before the two ever split, was that the fees were super low, and that's how it went from 0 cents to $1,000 or more, right? Because it started doing those small trades between a couple of people, and then it sort of slowly built up over time, right? So when we zoom out and look at this in perspective, essentially the story is that since the split, which is in here in early 2017, I think, was when they actually split off, but there was ruckus and community discussion for a long time before that. But when it got to that breaking point of fine, we're like, screw you guys, we're going to do it ourselves, because there was it's just game theory, right? If you try and negotiate with somebody, and at a certain point negotiations break down to, right, negotiating is not working, right? We just got to do it our way, and you can do it your way, and let's just do it like that. And I think one of the huge aspects of cryptocurrency, why I believe in it so strongly as I do, as a whole, as well as Bitcoin Cash specifically, is that when I think about in the early days of Bitcoin, I would think what could be better than Bitcoin? What could outcompete this, basically? Because I could see how Bitcoin could outcompete the US dollar, and then you sort of think, what could outcompete Bitcoin? So an obvious answer is other cryptocurrencies, right? And that's one angle to it. But luckily, one of the answers also is a better version of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin, you can't really split the US dollar into two competing versions and say, just have at it, right? Like, the US government is not going to run some parallel A-B experiment of the US dollar and the US dollar plus or something like that, where half of it is accepted at, for cannabis repository, what are they called? Cannabis shops or whatever, and the other half isn't, and we'll just see whether people really want to do. They can't do that, but in cryptocurrency we can do that, and in fact, it's not necessarily encouraged, but I think it's very important to the philosophy of market competition that people always have the option to go their own way and split up. And it has happened in a few different coins. Like, obviously it happened in Bitcoin, it's happened in Ethereum for completely different reasons, but it was the same kind of result. And the critical aspect of the split is that one side generally gets to keep the brand name, which is huge because obviously to people, such as yourself or to anybody else, the brand name has enormous weight, right? You know that, you've heard of that, you trust that, whatever.
Yeah, well, now that you say that, I guess I assumed, like most people would, Bitcoin Cash stemmed from Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Right. That it was Bitcoin's doing its thing, and then Bitcoin Cash
Split off, yeah.
bailed or like split off. But the way you're saying it there makes much more sense that they
were one.
Like it's hard to imagine. They were kind of they're fungible. They were exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And they could have been called opposite things.
That's right. And
it's just, they maybe should have both gotten new names. That would have made that psychological thing a bit more obvious. But
well, that's right.
That's very interesting.
And that's why there's a lot of rancor I guess on both sides of I always try to present, obviously I'm enormously biased to one side of this argument, but I do try and fill in. I will have somebody on the podcast as well who is a big BTC person at some point, so we can just discuss and let the listeners make up their own mind, right? But there is a lot of rancor over this split for this exact reason, which is that the Bitcoin Cash side, they think, well, we are really the real Bitcoin, right? And so they're constantly sort of, But
was something changed technologically? Like, is there a technological difference? Or?
Well, now that, and the thing is, over time they're starting to diverge. But at the time of the split,
right,
the issue was over this 1 megabyte cap to the size of the Bitcoin blocks. And so this is what you can see here, is that since this fork, Bitcoin basically has like flatlined in transactions, right? If you think 3 years of Bitcoin and it hasn't really been processing any more transactions than it was 3 years ago, if we had a graph of the previous 3 years, it would look like this, where it was just rocketing up constantly as more and more people got involved, more commerce was happening, whatever. And so then at a certain point, if we extended this graph back earlier, it stopped happening on Bitcoin, and that's when the Bitcoin Cash started up, right? The momentum for that. On the idea for that started up. So the split was originally over this 1 megabyte limit. So this is why now we're seeing that the two have met at this point, that they're doing roughly the same amount of transactions. But in theory, Bitcoin will still be flat because it can't process any more transactions. And Bitcoin Cash has, upside potential, right? It can keep accepting more commerce. That's the theory.
That's an insane graph. Like, I don't know what the hell's going on in July 2018.
Yeah, well, this is maybe just some sort of I think this was just network testing basically, because the Bitcoin Cash community was sort of like, their goal is for the transaction to be up here or up here, or off the graph eventually.
Oh, so maybe they just
pumped it around the network, I think, to just test it out and prove that it was viable. But this is more like looks like real adoption, right? This is obviously just we were just testing, but this is it's starting to take off. So
doesn't even quite look exponential though. It looks like a straight line.
Yeah, exactly. It's maybe on a bigger time frame, I think it will look a bit more exponential. But I don't know. There's a lot of factors in this, right? But so that's what the thing. So now if we look here, see, this is another interesting aspect of this story. Again, is that Bitcoin has just been flat in basically the amount of USD sent over the network as well for this whole time. And you can see recently it has, and a big part of that has gone up, and the big part of that is that the price has increased, basically, because the more the price of an individual coin increases, the more total value there is encompassed in the network, so the more you can send around, right? As well as when the price increases, obviously that will also come with either going up or down. As the volatility increases, there's more reasons for people to send it around, right? People are like trying to panic buy in, people are trying to panic sell, everybody's getting excited, the media's kicking off, right? So when there's a lot of hype and a lot of volatility in the price, then that also tends to kick off activity on the network, right? And so they have seen actually some pretty decent, substantial growth here. But to me, obviously, the big part of the story is here, where Bitcoin Cash was doing absolutely nothing. And now that Bitcoin has hit its limit, and as well the fees have correspondingly gone up, then that's sort of the opportunity for Bitcoin Cash, which all these years has had this philosophy of a different approach to how the fees were managed and what the goal of the currency is and whatever. Even though I thought
But it's that 1 megabyte limit you were talking about before. Is that they've hit that issue that they foresaw that caused the fork?
Yeah. So Bitcoin had hit that issue 3 years ago, and Bitcoin Cash split off to get around that issue. But because Bitcoin Cash was the smaller coin, right? Didn't get the brand name, and even though there was a lot of support in the community and in the like business infrastructure and everything like that, for a lot of different reasons, they ended up on the small side of the fork. And as a result, they at the start had much less, transacting going on, right? And so at the time when it was in contention, when the split happened, it was an issue, but it wasn't a critical issue yet. And so the Bitcoin Cash community split at that time in anticipation of the future goal of trying to be a global reserve currency. Whereas the Bitcoin community, they had their own ideas about how to manage that scenario. And what we've seen over time is that it's sort of degenerated. It's been this kind of backsliding to we're going to be a store of value and digital gold, right? There was 5 years ago, nobody was telling you Bitcoin was going to be digital gold. In fact, if anything, it was like, don't use gold, use Bitcoin, because of all these different, differences between them, right? Like, we already have gold, and that's good for its own reasons, but we've got Bitcoin, which is a new thing. And now, given, how things have played out and the distinction between the two is starting to polarize, Bitcoin Cash has more of that digital cash idea, which is what it was before 2017, and what the white paper says, Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, right? And then Bitcoin, they obviously have their own take on it, right? But anyway, so there's a lot in the you can read about that, or you can read about that and just look at some of my previous episodes. There's tons about it. The first episode especially goes into detail about all this. So yeah, but anyway, so the USD is obviously growing. So you can see here, quite importantly, is that so Bitcoin Cash has been growing, and this Bitcoin is doing maybe about 30 billion, right, in daily volume, and Bitcoin Cash is getting up to 8 to 10 billion. So the multiplier here is about 3x, right, where the amount of transacting going on in Bitcoin Cash is about, roughly a third. It was down here, it was a quarter to a fifth. Now it's up to a third of the same amount. And what's very important is that the price difference between these two right now is about 85 to 1. So Bitcoin Cash costs about, you can get 1 Bitcoin for the price you can get 85 Bitcoin Cash. And yet this is doing 1/3 of the actual real value of the real economic activity every single day. And I mean, obviously it's going to be lower because the price is lower, and also because, like I was explaining before, it's got a home for those smaller transactions, so those are going to happen on the network that supports it. But I think the flippening, sort of in the huge sense of the issue, is that eventually Bitcoin Cash will have this graph higher than Bitcoin. It'll have every single graph higher than Bitcoin, and then by the time it has that, eventually, sooner or later, the price is going to catch on. People are going to think, what's the point of Bitcoin if we have Bitcoin Cash? But that is my theory, and do your own due diligence, right? So, okay, so here we go. I don't know, what do you think about Elon Musk? He's been a running theme on the podcast the last couple of days. Are you a huge Elon Musk believer?
I am, yeah. I like what he's doing, and I wish him all the luck. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you've been following, but in the last couple of months, he's sort of caught the crypto bug himself, and his Twitter feed has become this sort of hype train for for cryptocurrency. He was bringing up Dogecoin a lot, and then even on the last episode or the one before, I think it was, I don't know, but he bought a bunch of Bitcoin. So that's obviously going a step towards legitimizing it, and obviously there's a lot of back and forth, right? Bitcoin itself, BTC, is now at all-time highs, like $56,000 or something like that, probably at least partly as a result of the momentum that he's generated. Other companies now got to think about getting involved, all that. But one thing that obviously the Bitcoin Cash community is interested in is the idea that, well, Elon's a smart guy, and I think he's going to figure it out, just like what I was explaining to you before. Whether he has or hasn't already, I mean, I sort of tend to the view that maybe he has, but even so, it's still a pretty big step for Tesla to be putting $1 billion into he wasn't going to say, "Oh, I've just got a bunch of Bitcoin Cash and I never even bought Bitcoin." Like that, I can't see that happening when he was already breaking so much ground, to sell to his investors and stuff like that. Like we're going to get into cryptocurrency, but so who knows? He's a bit of a joker, right? He definitely has his own style of how he does things. But he did yesterday, or the day before, maybe he changed his Twitter picture from the SpaceX rocket to this fork sticking in the road, which was known in. There's actually two articles. One by Mike Hearn, who was he unfortunately left the Bitcoin Cash community. I hope he comes back. Mike, if you ever watch this video, mate, good to have you back. But he wrote one of the original implementations of this is how we're going to split off at the time when they were trying to do, it was sort of like a vote on the Bitcoin network. It was sort of like, because everybody was so undecided, they thought, look, why don't we just have two different options that run on the same network and people can run them both and we'll see, it's like a decentralized vote, if everybody's running that they want to indicate to move to the bigger blocks, then we can follow that. And if people don't, and so he made the software, it was called Bitcoin XT, to do that. And then it sort of got subjected to this huge amount of abuse and a bit of a disinformation campaign and everything like that. And that's how it sort of degenerated into, right, we're just splitting off, like, because obviously you're not even interested in discussing, let alone being reasonable or adjusting your position, right? But anyway, so basically he wrote an article which was discussing about the fork and everything about that. And another guy called Vinny Lingham, so people can load up these, the links are on the slides, which are on bitcoincashpodcast.com for anybody who wants to find the slides with all the links. And so they both use this picture, and I mean it's just a picture of a fork in a road. There's 1,000 places anyone could have found it. It's a pretty common stock image, but it certainly seems prescient a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, why else would he put it there? It depends what he's talking about, I guess. But,
I mean, yeah, he could just, maybe he's just playing around with everyone, or who knows. And he had this video this week. Well, he said, "I see crypto as a replacement for cash," and I mean, the Bitcoin Cash community jumped on that. I think if you watch the clip again, the link is down here in the description. What he's sort of talking about is he's talking about the illegal and the legal market, where he says, look, if in the past, if you had, in some countries, you had transactions going on, like, let's say in Amsterdam, you can buy some magic mushrooms, and then in another country, you can't have that transaction, but if you have cash, even though, it's different fiat currencies, right? But basically, in Amsterdam, you can use cash to buy magic mushrooms, and you can use that same cash to buy a house in the UK. So in that way, cash can support both use cases, and that's very important because obviously legal regulation differs around the world, so there needs to be some way to sort of arbitrage.
Right.
You can't have a currency which is only used to buy illegal stuff, because if that was the case, at some point somebody on the chain is selling the illegal stuff and needs to buy food or a house. They need to be back in the legalized market, so you've got to have something that can do both, and cash historically served that functionality. But now cash is going extinct because everything's becoming digitized. People are just using their phone balances and whatever, right? And so the market needs some sort of intermediary like that. And he says, well, that's the function that Bitcoin serves, which again sort of ties into that. Well, firstly, it's very insightful by him, because it is that's what we've seen, that one of the first major use cases for Bitcoin was buying drugs. It was fulfilling that exact function, and now we're seeing it expand into you can pay your bills, or you can order food or buy a gift card or whatever with Bitcoin Cash. But the other thing is that, so I don't think it was exactly as strong as saying Bitcoin should be cash or anything. I think he's just making a point about it needing to swap over. But I do also think that Elon is a smart guy, and he's an engineer, so I'm sure if he hasn't already, at some point, well, he probably already has, he's going to read the white paper, and he's also going to think about how can I take this global, because that's his nature, right? He doesn't do things at like I made this cool thing. It's more like, we're going to have every person on the, we're getting the entire of humanity to Mars. It's like, we're going to start with one rocket, but eventually everyone's going to be there, right?
Yeah. I mean, like the sort of, for the little I know about Bitcoin, it really does seem, at least from a like a narrative perspective, to be the next logical step.
Yeah, it's just
of just finance. But yeah, maybe I don't know. Is SpaceX gonna split into two companies? Who knows?
well, that's right.
It could be anything. Maybe he just dropped his fork. Maybe he was like,
yeah, exactly. And I wouldn't put it past him to be just poking the bear a little bit and just trying to rile up
he
the
does that all the time.
community. So that's a classic. But I don't know. I think the only thing that matters to me is that it's on his mind, because I think if it's on his mind, sooner or later, like I said about that funnel, he's going to get to the bottom of the funnel. And because he's a smart dude, I think he's actually going to do it pretty quick. But I think there's a big difference between that and obviously, announcing that he supports it, or buying 1 billion of it and putting it in Tesla, or, whatever else. Like, obviously, all other things aside, Bitcoin does actually work for a Tesla purchase, because paying a $10 fee to buy a Tesla is fine. And obviously he knew he would rile up the community. But
the only explanation in my head the only reason someone wouldn't buy Bitcoin, and I guess this is the reason I haven't really, is that I don't know if it's something that's just, I mean, the only possible reason you wouldn't buy it is if it's going to vanish or go to zero, or some bug is found, or I don't know, some disaster happens that just wipes it out. That's kind of, otherwise, it's so useful and it's infinitely scalable and like the obvious next step. So maybe any kind of acknowledgement from Elon Musk, who is seen as like the whole technocrat future thing, is like, is sort of removing that concern that might be holding back millions of people.
And I mean that is what it is, right? That's the theme of this episode, is talking about adoption and new users and so on, and that is quite an important aspect to it, which is what I was saying at the start of the podcast. Is the reason I have the tagline, is the global reserve currency, is that I do think that that's what it's going to be. It's going to spread to every single person everywhere, and it's sort of very interesting to watch this entire story. It has been since 2013 for me, or for at whatever point other people started following it, that seeing a technological shift on a sort of civilization scale, right? That money is used everywhere in the world by every single person pretty much. And if you have that like the reason that money is something that a lot of people will never think about, right? It's just, well, that everyone else uses it, so I uses it, right? But that didn't come from nowhere. People didn't start, in the jungle trading pieces of paper with dead presidents' heads on them, or anything like that. They didn't even start with gold, even though that was, for a time, that was the thing. Or they didn't start with shells necessarily. Some communities just use an oral ledger where everybody just agrees. The tribal elder, maybe he says who owes who what. There's 100 different systems for money, and we are seeing a new one being born right here. And the price of cryptocurrency, especially if you don't take just Bitcoin, but let's say you take the entire cryptocurrency scene as a whole, that is basically a measure of the awareness in the global population that this is the shift we're in the middle of. And of course, it's been rocketing up over a multi-year time frame, because just you don't really go backwards. You can get into crypto and you can get obsessed about it and talk about it and shout about it like we talked about. But even in the very worst case, where you try Bitcoin, maybe you bought some, it crashed, you got disappointed about it, you sold out, or anything like that, even in the very worst case, you can't go back to saying it's not a thing, or it doesn't. There was, for years, this is not a thing, or it's a scam, or it's going to go away, or whatever reasonings people had. You can't unhear about Bitcoin, and you also can't unuse it. Once you've sent some crypto to somebody else, even if you never send another cryptocurrency transaction in your life, you're not going to say, oh, these other people doing this evil cryptocurrency, because you just know, oh, I did that. I'm part of that crowd. I kind of get it, right? So,
and in the history of money, it wasn't that everything had to be totally not all of it was just totally natural and just it, and it just evolved. I mean, governments and groups made big decisions that changed how money worked
Yeah.
all the time. Because I read what made me realize that, because I just assumed that it started as shells and then it evolved into copper and then into gold and then onto paper and then onto computers. You know, that kind of trajectory. But then I was reading Benjamin Franklin's autobiography.
Yeah.
He was one of the first people to write an autobiography, and just on the side, you know, the one thing I read that and I was like, no wonder Americans love this guy.
Yeah.
Holy crap, he was amazing. Like all the stuff he did. But he just mentions in passing, like it wasn't even a highlight of his life because he just did so much stuff. But he was involved in the debate about whether to move just to paper
Currency.
money.
Yeah.
Like that was happening around that time, and it was a decision they had to all think about. And people were sitting, and some of them were arguing, you know, we're moving too far away from gold, everything's going to collapse. And they were thinking that, you know, in the 1700s. So this kind of looks like the next steps of that, where people think this can't work because it's too far removed from value or whatever it is, and it's the same worries that people had 300 years ago.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just their version of Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash in some sense as well. Is, are we having the US dollar, or are we having gold-backed notes, or whatever? And I mean, people who would, I mean, obviously, paper currency has had phenomenal success, right? You can't deny that. But the other thing you can be assured of is that if you had a gold bar in the 1700s and you still had it today, you'd be doing fine. If you had whatever currency they had then, you know, like people know, even from the, you know, that old classic story of, oh, when I was a kid, it was $1 to buy a huge burger at the, you know, my granddad bought a movie ticket for 20 cents or whatever. And then now it's, you know, it's depreciated magnitudes over that time. But if you had a gold bar, then you were still fine in the future. And then that sort of gets into, okay, so you have a limited supply currency. And if the government is not inflating it away and stealing everybody, that's a bit loaded for me to say it like that, but, you know, it's taking people's value and all that sort of stuff, you know, and then that's why cryptocurrency, you know, started as it did, and one of the many reasons for its phenomenal success is the idea that we are returning to a more powerful or a more fundamentally solid monetary system. And that is why the cryptocurrency economy, despite all the scams and all the doubt and all the, you know, dismissal, has just boomed at an insane rate, because the efficiency of the functional currency in that economy is so much higher that just snowballs out of control, obviously. Because it's like, to me, I imagine it's like being on one of those, not a treadmill, but, you know, one of those things they have at the airport, like where it has a really long runway and you can stand on it and it just sort of carries you along, right? Do you know what I'm talking about? There's little automated walkway things. And if you're on the, you know, the government currency, you're on one of those treadmills, but you're walking the wrong way. You're walking against the thing because your currency is fundamentally depreciating away from under you, so everything is a battle to get rid of it and try and give it away to someone else. And that's why our financial system has become so financialized in terms of, let's say, investing in stocks, for instance, right? People think you've got to invest in stocks for your retirement or whatever because that's the safe thing, but that's completely backwards, right? Investing is the practice of taking risk. So saving money should be the safe thing, but it's no longer safe to just leave your money to just let it sit. It's just not. And that's what it is. And then in contrast, cryptocurrency is the opposite, where let's say you put some of your cash into cryptocurrency, or you start transacting in that economy, then it's the treadmill, but you're going the other way. You're walking with the treadmill, so it's zipping you along at an increased speed, even over what you're doing. Because let's say you had a Bitcoin business in 2013, well, all else being aside, the value of your base savings has exploded 1,000%. So you're now your life is getting easier, not harder. And that's kind of comes back to, the whole idea of a monetary system. And people have these arguments about, well, if we had a gold-based system, it would be, better and all that. But there's not actual real-world evidence for that for people who are not, willing to read up on the history or try it all out or whatever. And that's the whole point of cryptocurrency, is that it's an actually viable, implementable version of that kind of thing. Right? Okay, so there's this site, I don't know if you probably wouldn't have heard of it, but it's called read.cash, and it's partly responsible for that massive growth in transactions that we were talking about before. Oh, no. And what it is, let's just load it up right now, is basically it's kind of like Reddit or like WordPress or anything like that, but it's just a blogging platform. And we'll see here, it's going to load up. I think I've got about $10, but people are writing. Okay, I got $10, but people are writing up their articles, which let's say a lot of it is about Bitcoin Cash because was founded by a guy who's into Bitcoin Cash. But basically, the idea is that you can write an article, and then everybody can send you tips at the bottom. So this IRLFiam2. She's actually this is the same one that wrote that previous article there. And you write an article, and then at the bottom, look here, people can send in. So she's got $2 worth of, I think this is the same one. Anyway, she had all these tips here, and people can tip you for writing good content, right? So it's a directly monetized journalism of a sorts, I suppose.
Yeah.
Without needing an advertising model or anything like that. And see, obviously, this kind of thing what is no longer feasible on BTC Core. It's feasible on Bitcoin Cash though, because the fees are still under a cent. Obviously, if there was $10 fees, this kind of thing doesn't work. But then everybody's starting to contribute these little. Here we go. See, here's this related article that I linked. People are starting to contribute in this economy, and in this way, because Bitcoin Cash is so much more easy to transact, then obviously you also couldn't really do this with PayPal, because maybe somebody wrote some article that PayPal wouldn't agree with. Everybody has to sign up for a PayPal account.
Yeah.
Yada 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 yada. And so
is Bitcoin Cash protected from that large transaction
cost?
Well,
that's we're going to wait and see, right? And that's where it's the BTC Core people might say to you, no, definitely not, and they would have their reasons for that. But I think that yes, generally speaking, yes. The plan is to raise the block size, and if we get up to those full blocks, then we'll raise it again, and then the community is looking into other ways to be able to handle a global scale of transaction volume, right? That's not going to happen overnight. But the idea is that if in the long run is to maintain those very, very, very small fees as a priority, because it allows use cases like this, and it allows people to actually transact in, and for it to become more of a daily currency, right? So that's you can read up on that in your own time. There's a lot of factors to that. I'm sure I'll do episodes discussing that too as well. But the point is that there is this kind of microblogging type of platform going on, and this girl here, she's in the Philippines, and she has written this article, one of a bunch of good ones, where she went out and handed out leaflets about Bitcoin Cash to a bunch of people and documented how it went, and there's a YouTube video and everything. You can look at it, it's really good. But she got $144 of tips, right, which is one of the highest I've seen on the site. But that directly came from the community for her doing good work, being a contributor in the community. So if you think about an economy, let's say like a country's economy, the value of that currency is basically proportional. There's no actual value to that currency. The currency is the value of all the people who are involved in it, who are working on businesses and building things and creating goods and services, right? So the Bitcoin Cash economy is doing that, and same as the Bitcoin economy, same as every cryptocurrency in theory, are all competing on this same base. In the long term, in the short term, there's a lot of speculation and hype. But in the long term, people are competing on this idea of building an actual usable thing that you can trade around. And one of the interesting parts about it is that the rich holders of a currency like this guy who, Mark Demisel, shout out to him. I think he's listened to the podcast before, if he listens. Shout out, Mark. Is that a big holder of the currency is actually incentivized to spread the wealth sort of downwards, in the sense that if he is already making money, he's already profitable, or he has a lot of Bitcoin Cash, it's much better for him to help other people in the economy who are doing good work get funding, and then that lets them do more good work, and then that raises the value of everybody's holdings, right? Because it's a limited supply and nobody's centrally in charge of it. So as a result, I told my mate about this idea, and he said, yeah, it's almost kind of like a pyramid scheme. And again, it kind of comes back to the whole scam angle. But it's the opposite, where the people at the bottom are benefiting from joining the economy rather than being the suckers at the end. Because if you switch in then, and you're on a more fundamentally sound monetary system, if you do good work and you get rewarded, you can get rewarded directly from other parts of the economy. And then...
Yeah. Is there anything in principle stopping Bitcoin doing, like, well, this was transaction size,
yeah,
I guess. But is there also less of this community drive in Bitcoin Cash?
In BTC Core,
I think in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think there is, and that's one of the two reasons that, even though right now, well, it's hard to tell exactly who is the bigger or the smaller kind of currency, right? But the price differential would indicate there should be, like I said before, 85 times more people on Bitcoin Core being productive, starting businesses, doing this, that, and the other thing. But in my mind, when the split happened between BTC Core and Bitcoin Cash way back in the day, most of the sort of productive part of the economy, the developers, well, not all of them, but a significant chunk of the developers, a significant chunk of the business people, a significant chunk of the people who are actually using it as currency, they went with the Bitcoin Cash side, and the Bitcoin side, it was more like riding on the brand value, like we discussed about before, right? And I think that disparity has only increased over time, because, of course, people going to Bitcoin, they don't have any narrative or any stuff like this going on. To them, it's mostly about, store of value and gold, and we're going to put it in a vault and wait. But that doesn't work. It worked for gold, and the reason it worked for gold is because gold used to be like this, and people still know that. So there's a bit of a history there, right? But there's no, at least in my perspective, again, somebody who was a big supporter of Bitcoin would maybe have a different opinion, but to them, that is the value, that we can all lock it in a vault, and as long as we have enough people all locking it together in a vault, well, then the price is going to keep going up because there's a limited supply. But that's not actually creating utility, and it's definitely not creating economic growth or having this same effect that I mentioned, where powerful contributors in the community, and it doesn't matter, it's decentralized, right? So for instance, she's doing these leaflets right in the Philippines, which is amazing, because she can speak to people in Filipino and approach the local market in whatever sense it makes sense to her in that case, and then I'm doing this podcast, and then other people starting businesses, or everybody's chipping in a funny way. It's actually even maybe it has sort of like that communist element of to each according to his needs, and from each according to his capability, right? It is that idea, you can contribute whatever you want, and to any extent you want. If you want to just buy some and sit on it, you can do that, but ultimately, if you want the currency to be successful, you've got to be a bit more proactive about that. And it's very important that your currency is full of, like you're saying about people being hardcore, that's a great thing, I think, is it shows that people they're committed to the vision and the project, and it's not really lucky, but it is the case that in some sense, the more you give, the more you can receive with this exact project, because there is a financial incentive, but the more you contribute, like this lady here with the leaflets and everything like that. I don't know whether or not that was the most effective strategy, but the point is that I sent her $2 because I thought, wow, this is amazing. That's showing a lot of passion, a lot of initiative, and she'll be rewarded for that. And see, well, that was great. And then let's say the thing is, this then multiplies on itself if the currency of Bitcoin Cash, if the price rises relative to, especially to fiat currencies, but let's say also relative to other cryptocurrencies, then the people who were there contributing and getting paid in Bitcoin Cash, then their wealth even increases further. So then they have even more resources to keep spreading around their contribution and then to start contributing out to other people, you know. So yeah, it's a very powerful ecosystem like that.
Yeah, right. I haven't thought about it like that.
Right. So anyway, this is amazing. So well done here, and I think Bitcoin Cash seems to be killing it in the Philippines on this read.cash. There's quite a lot of articles. I had a look at a few from different people in the Philippines, because that's the kind of country again where it does sort of make sense that relatively they're not super well connected to the financial system, and the cost of living is lower, so a smaller amount of Bitcoin Cash goes further there. And it's also a case where BTC is obviously not going to be making inroads. I just certainly don't know of anybody on the streets of the Philippines spreading Bitcoin awareness like this. So yeah, just interesting. So yeah, this kind of comes to this idea that I think there's been a shift in mindset towards cryptocurrency. It's always happening. It's always a process. But I think especially in the last year or so, I think that I sort of feel like the dam is starting to break, because in 2013, so for 8 years, it'll be coming up to sort of 9 years, so almost a decade I've been involved, and the whole thing has been going for 12 years, and that's a long time. That's a lot of people just hearing about it. Oh, I don't know about it, da 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 da. And there was just years and years of, it's a scam, it's not going to work, so whatever. But time always levels the playing field, and the longer things go on, you can't ignore it forever, right? When you hear about something the first time, you think, all right, the second time, the fifth time, the 20th time, the 100th time, the 500th time. Obviously, everybody has their individual circumstances into how much they get involved or what their use case is at that particular time. But it doesn't die, it doesn't go away. And so, I mean, now just being 2021, I even put a bit of credence in the fact that it's just a new decade, is that people have, some sense of we are living in the future. In the 2013, the 2020s was some far distant future, but now we're living in it. It sort of makes sense that something like cryptocurrency is more like, well, why aren't we thinking about that? Sort of coming to that same narrative of, it's a scam. That's just not going to truck anymore. And anybody who is still saying that kind of thing is sooner or later just is on the wrong side of the fence, where everybody's going to start looking at them like, you're just behind the times, you're just outdated. It's like saying the internet is the thing after the year 2000, right? It's just before then, maybe there was a bit more, I don't know, I was too young, I wasn't necessarily in the mix with all that, right? But there was a certain point at which the narrative shifted. Your sound's cut out, man. I don't know if you... All right, yeah. Yeah, you're back.
Is that better? Because I had that token REN. I had some REN, and I thought I better understand more about what decentralized finance is. So I was watching these videos on DeFi, and it was talking about the history of it, and it started. What year did it start? 2009 or something?
Bitcoin, yeah, it was 2009. Yeah, it was the white paper was
that blew me away. I'm a little older than you. Maybe, I don't know, 8 years older than you or something, but it blew me away how recent that was, because I moved to Canberra before then, right? And then the whole Ethereum only started like 5 years ago, or something, 5 or 6 years ago. 13 or 2014. I was trading Ethereum in 2014, so I think it was like 2013 that it started, maybe. Yeah, but I think it started getting prominence maybe in about 2015, 2016 was when it started increasing in value. Okay, yeah. It's just totally ridiculous how fast that is. Like, it's...
Maybe I wasn't trading Ethereum at that time. Maybe it was 2015. I don't know. We'd have to look that up.
It was so great to be watching a history video that was talking about 2 months ago as like important history in the industry. It was great.
That's right, and that's part of what this podcast is about. Like I referenced before, that I think it is a bit of a history, right? And this is the most incredible story on the planet, basically, in my mind, that started, in 2009, and I've been avidly following it all that time. I can't believe I didn't figure out, look, I should just start documenting this earlier, right? But I don't know, I had other stuff going on in my life, right? But now I'm kind of like, we should make this. And I think the proof is sort of in the pudding, right? Where if people come to it and they're wondering, what is this all about? They'll be able to listen to the latest episode and see, okay, this is where things are at. And then if they're interested, if they go down the rabbit hole, which tends to happen a bit with cryptocurrency, then they could go back to some of the earlier episodes and see 2 weeks ago, what was the price, what was being talked about, what were the guests on the show, what was their kind of vibe, right? All that sort of stuff. And as time goes on, there'll be more and more of that until it'll be, okay, we can look up this and then look at the 2 years ago, the prediction of that. I mean, there are other podcasts and other news sources and stuff that will be running on a long time, right? So people can find those and look into that. But even if you just look at the price graph, again, you sort of have to think of it not from the value of this huge speculative bubble, but if you think of it in the sense of global awareness of cryptocurrency and this being some sort of rough measure of that, it's been just exploding, basically. Not exactly since inception, but since it acquired a market price, effectively, yeah. So I think that's just been it, and it's funny we're talking about Ethereum. Vitalik, the founder of Ethereum, right here with talking about how he thought cryptocurrency would normalize into society, but it's kind of going the other way. That the rest of the world is sort of starting to move into cryptocurrency rather than cryptocurrency becoming more normal, and as well as we've seen in the financial story. Obviously there was 2008 was like a big turning point, and then we've had coronavirus recently and the GameStop stuff and all those kind of things. It is going on all the time, right? So this is sort of the main topic that we're getting to, but we've sort of touched on a few points. Is that I wanted to talk about how cryptocurrency adoption happens and how any, let's say, relative to a government currency, and then also relative to each other in some sense. So why Bitcoin Cash might accumulate more support over time in the long run than Bitcoin or than Ethereum, or why any of them might outcompete each other. It all kind of comes down to these fundamentals, right? So the first group that you need when you're running a cryptocurrency is you need some miners. Because if you don't have them, well, that's what it's all like. That's where the transaction processing happens. If you don't have any miners, you don't have a network, basically. I mean, people who are listening who are very invested might say, well, there's proof of stake. There's a lot of different things. But let's just say fundamentally you need some miners for a proof of work coin like Bitcoin Cash. And what's the incentive for them to be involved? Well, luckily that's baked in, right? The miners are the ones who get rewarded with the new Bitcoin Cash. So of course people start mining it, and then that incentive continues as the coin trades around. More and more people want to mine it, and it just goes from there, right? So there's not really any effort needed to be spent by the community on getting a lot of miners, because the whole system is set up. That was the genius of Bitcoin that Satoshi set up, was that, okay, those people at least are going to be, they're in it to win it. Like, either way, they're not, they're investing their time and effort and money into doing this. So they're not just going to give up and rack off somewhere else willy-nilly, right? At the very least, that's the core of it. Okay, so the second thing you need is developers, right? And this is a very important point, because unlike a fiat currency, well, I guess they have some infrastructure in the sense of they have, like, whoever's at the Reserve Bank or whatever that is at the US Fed, that is sort of, they need economists basically to manage their currency and keep it all flowing around smoothly, and who knows, to tweak the levers or whatever in their system. But in a cryptocurrency, you need to have developers, because there's been this sort of intersection of money and code, which is obviously a very modern thing as well. But the developers matter a lot more than I think in the long run people are going to give them credit for, because as Bitcoin Cash spreads around, the developers are generally quite low visibility in an ICO or in some sort of, early stage crypto. Everybody's very excited about who's the developer, and this guy is a genius coder, and this, that, and the other. But the developers are running your currency in the literal sense of they're the ones keeping the network online. They're doing the bug fixes and updates, and also, they're doing the bug fixes and updates at the core level. They're also building a lot of the infrastructure. So you have the network, but then you've got to have a wallet. You've got to have integration with businesses. You've got to have, new products like that AnyHedge that we saw, so that you can do different things. They're responsible for all of that, and that's not necessarily focused on by the community. Or I think it's important that Bitcoin Cash, for the health of the community, maintains a strong focus on that, and that's why in some other episodes I've talked about the different node implementations, and Bitcoin Cash is doing quite well on that front, where it has 5 or 6 node implementations, where Bitcoin Core only has 1, which both means that there's less central control over it because there's different groups of people involved, but it also means more heads is better than one, right? Like amongst themselves, if they can coordinate and organize and build in protocol updates, nobody just rams anything through. It has to be a good idea, because otherwise people will have objections and changes and so on and so forth. So how do you get developers involved with your coin? Right, well, the most direct way is you just pay them to do it. So that's what crowdfunding kind of comes into it. And in the early days of Bitcoin, it was of both Bitcoins, it was basically just a passion project, right? So that's when I was saying about Mike Hearn before, and Gavin Andreessen, and some of these developers, even Satoshi, him or herself, it sort of comes to, it's just cool. Cryptocurrency is just cool. So there's no surfeit of developers in the entire cryptocurrency economy as a whole. Developers will just find it and be like, I want to be involved. This rocks. This is so cool. This is cutting edge. It's different. It's obviously permissionless, so people can just get involved. So there's going to be a lot of developers in the scene. But the key point is you want them working on your currency, not somebody else's currency. That's the real battle. So the crowdfunding is obviously one way to do it, where you just pay them in your currency and they get excited about it. And for Bitcoin Cash, they've got this thing called Flipstarter, which is basically like Kickstarter, except it all runs directly on Bitcoin Cash with no overhead from Kickstarter themselves. And one of the guests that I had recently, might have even been the last episode, was this guy Jonas. Shout out to Jonas. Sure, he's probably listening. And he has just been doing that. He's just doing a Flipstarter to be doing more work on developing products for Bitcoin Cash. So I think Bitcoin Cash have done doing a good job on that front. The second one, obviously, is that you want to have like jobs. So if you have a cryptocurrency based economy, or you are a cryptocurrency company, then you hire some developers, let's say like Coinbase or any of the big exchanges. Obviously they hire developers, but if an exchange hires developers, they're going to hire a spread of them to work on all the different currencies, so they can plug into every part of the ecosystem. But if you have a very strong economy going on in your particular currency, which is specific to your currency, then you can get developers that get interested and invested in being involved specifically on your currency and becoming experts in that, and they're very, very valuable, as opposed to just mercenaries that they do a little bit of work and then they don't really believe in the project, and then they switch over to the equivalent on some other currency. And then obviously cool tech, right, is you don't necessarily, there's a balance. You don't necessarily want your currency to be the most, we're adding in 1,000 different things every different day, because that sort of instability is bad for other parts of the ecosystem. But you do want to have some aspect of innovation, research, being on the cutting edge, trying out new things, and keeping the platform open to that sort of experimentation or updating, because developers, money is not the be all and end all. They do also like just to work on certain projects, just because it's fun for them, right? Yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts about any of this so far. Like, you might even knowing quite a few developers, right?
That seems to me to be one of the limiting factors, at least, because even if you convince me totally to just sink 10 grand into Bitcoin Cash right
Yeah.
now, I wouldn't know how to do it. And like I don't know if this exists, but it's weird that I don't know it exists, that I can just go somewhere and enter my credit card details and get it and just like run with that. The fact that it's still a bit of a runaround is...
I think that's always going to be a bit of a runaround, right? It's an interesting aspect to it that obviously it is kind of difficult to get into cryptocurrency, but the real... There's two main reasons for that. One reason is because it's new, so obviously anything that's new is more, less developed. It doesn't have all the infrastructure. But the second reason is actually not cryptocurrencies. Well, and that's just solved by time, right? That's not really an inherent, property of Bitcoin Cash or of any other cryptocurrency. And as we've seen, now let me tell you, buying a cryptocurrency now is 1,000,000 times easier than it was 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? So that's all. Time is gradually fixing that problem. But the other part of the problem is the interface is the choke point between cryptocurrency and fiat currency, and that's because the fiat currency system sucks. Once you have cryptocurrency, getting any other cryptocurrency takes about 5 seconds. But having
after I said it, I realized honestly I wouldn't know how to get other fiat currency.
Well, yeah.
You have to go to a bloody travel place currency conversion thing. Yeah,
exactly. So that's kind of an interesting aspect to it, which is that as the cryptocurrency economy has just been exploding off in its own little bubble, and there's still that choke point of people going through from one side to the other, then sort of that's people get interested for one reason or another, but hopefully they buy a little bit or they switch over, and then suddenly they discover it's like the whole world opens up because people are not buying into cryptocurrency thinking about, what about like any hedge we were talking about, or different apps or things that I could do. That's not even coming into their mind. They're buying it for some other different reasons. But then once you've got some, you start sort of thinking, oh, wait, so now you're looking into it. You discover, there's this business, or there's this technology, or I didn't know about this, or this is cool, or this is going and so that's another reason why people get into cryptocurrency and then they don't get out of it, because once you get into it, there's a lot going on.
A
lot of reasons to like it. Yeah. Okay, so who's the next group of people that could be involved? So this is speculators. So these are the lowest value people on this list. I have them at the third, not because they're the third most important, but because in this progression they're quite important to talk about, which is that they tend to be the third group of people after the miners and the developers who get involved, which is related to what we were saying before about Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash, as to who is in which community. Because Bitcoin Core is so focused on the price, which is basically what store of value is we want the price to go up. Because they're focused on that, they're attracting a lot of people who are in it basically for speculation, to sit and watch the price go up. And those people are terrible. Well, they're not terrible. It's inevitable that you have some people in your economy like that, either because they're at that phase of their cryptocurrency adoption, and down the road they'll start thinking, oh, can I actually use this? Or, that's just a phase people go through. But
it's funny, you say they're low value, which is totally true. But when I look at that list of everything else, no other group there actually generates news relevance. So
maybe
miners and developers, there aren't stories about those. A business starts adopting Bitcoin, maybe like there's a new Bitcoin ATM, you might get a news story. But when Bitcoin breaks 50K, it's like all over the news everywhere, and that's when millions and millions of people are looking at it at a time. So and that's all the speculators. That's their effect, or the fact people care about what they think. One of those things is actually might be a huge driver of adoption.
Yeah, I'm not saying they have no place in the economy. I think they're very, very useful, like you're saying. But the key point is that those speculators that might all pile into Bitcoin, well, they can all pile into Bitcoin Cash next week, right? Because they have no particular, if the allegiance is to, we're trying to make money, and you can see that. You can go on Reddit, you can go on /cryptocurrency, or you can go on coinmarketcap.com. And the reason all those coins are rocketing around all the time is not because there's some huge amount of new tech I mean, there is as in aggregate, but one coin is not specifically outcompeting another on the fundamentals on any given day. It's just more like the hype cycle is flowing onto that coin, and all the people are rushing in and out of different coins, right? So like Bitcoin Cash does not need to focus on attracting speculators, because it will attract them naturally as the base builds up underneath it. Then it sort of hits a critical tipping point of hype, like Elon Musk says, this is some cool tech, I'm going to buy some, and then all the speculators all pile in, right? And then that creates the the visibility, like you're saying, right? So I think you always have some speculators, and it's not bad to have them. It's probably better to have somebody holding a currency for speculation than not have them holding it. But the key is that you want to try and keep your ratio as high as possible. You don't want to be focusing on aspects that attract speculation. Like you can make, that's what those ICO coins and stuff like that, that's what that was all about. It was about, can we make the flashiest video to attract the most speculators in the long term? And then 1 year later, that coin's dead, or nobody's heard of it, or whatever, because it was like empty calories. You're just pumping your ecosystem full of people that are going to leave at the first sign of trouble, or who have no reason to stay besides the price going up, and that obviously doesn't carry on forever. Okay, so now we've got businesses. So on the infrastructure side, so cryptocurrency exchanges, payment processors, things like Jonas was making with in the Bitcoin Cash ecosystem, you want to attract those businesses, and they have a bit of a different angle on it than others, because for them the pool of users is quite important. Obviously a bigger cryptocurrency is more incentive to be involved, more potential customers. They're also maybe perhaps more friendly to regulation than any other group in this category, where they sort of want government oversight to a certain extent, and they also but there is mitigation to that. They can just move to a different jurisdiction, especially with an internet-based type of platform. It's not necessarily that it's a problem, but it's not the end of the world to relocate. And so one thing that communities do want is they want a lot of infrastructure support, and one way to get that, again, is sort of, I guess maybe the speculators sort of contribute here. If you have a lot of speculators, you're going to get a lot of exchange volume and so on and so forth. So that can definitely help in that respect. But you want to keep as well, it's sort of tight. I mean, every group is related to each other, right? But the developers are a big deal with the businesses, because they can see, oh, look, like for instance, currently Bitcoin Core, with the high fees and with the technological direction they've been taking, has created a lot of grief for the exchanges, because people buy Bitcoin and then they want to sell it, and it costs them $10, and they say, why does this cost $10? What is this ridiculous fees? And they complain to support, and then the support have to ameliorate to them, oh, okay, this is this is how you got into this situation. I know you don't understand it, but there are good reasons for it, blah, blah, blah. That costs them time and money to be dealing with all that. So you want to minimize that amount of hassle for for the businesses, for the companies, because if you make their life difficult, well, in the end, they're going to make your life difficult by not listing your coin, or promoting another coin, or I don't know, assigning more developers to work on a good coin, which is doing good stuff for them, rather than one that's just a pain in the ass and just piss them all off. So so that's another reason that low fees are very important, which is underrated, I would say, by the BTC core crowd, is the second order effects that they don't realize whether even just the transactions is enough on its own, but once you factor in that the more friction you add in your system, that spreads out everywhere in a million different ways. So now we've got businesses like merchants. So this is like McDonald's. You want to buy a burger, they're not trying to build the next greatest cryptocurrency, they're just trying to sell burgers. And currency being currency, one way to do it is to accept Bitcoin Cash. To me, this is...
it seems like they would just follow what's happening. Like they'll be late adopters.
That's right. I don't see a great need to really go out and push this angle. I don't mind if the Bitcoin Cash community, even though the marketing is to be cash and everything, I think they just adopt naturally. If everybody else is using that currency, they're just going to accept whatever's available. So you can try and make it easy for them. It's good to have point of sale software, that sort of thing, but fundamentally,
unless it's a signal, unless they're signaling by doing it. So businesses will only do what's in their financial interest, unless it's a brand thing or a signaling thing. And obviously the long run goal of that is to make more money. But if it turns out that allowing or supporting Bitcoin Cash makes you appear like
cool, cutting edge,
a forward-thinking business, a cutting edge, something like that. That might have an effect, but otherwise, I think seems to me that I wouldn't put it into my business, for example.
Well, there you go. I mean, it adds a lot of stress at the moment. You've got to do about taxes differently. You've got to learn to get it set up. You've got to train your staff how to use it, and there's not necessarily a huge pool of users, so you're not going to have flooding through the door Bitcoin Cash users tomorrow. I mean, there is some aspect to that in the sense that, especially if you're an online business, you can accept it and then you can post in the Bitcoin Cash communities and people will be like, wow, this is really cool. And maybe you can build up a following that way. But you're right. To me, the main thing is to spreading it to users. And then once you have a certain critical mass of users, the merchants kind of just follow along. So you don't there are cases like I'm not shitting on anybody that is focused on that, because that is an important part of the community. It's not bad. But I also don't, it has specific niches. Like, for instance, if you wanted to do this kind of thing, a good idea, which I've seen some people doing, is you want to find one area and you want to like one block in a city, and you want to get every business there on the game plan. That's a lot better than having one here, one there, one in the next city. That you want to create a critical mass and a little hub, because then the people who work at those businesses, well, maybe they get paid in Bitcoin Cash and then they can spend it at the shop next door, because that's how a local economy works. So there are ways to tackle this problem, but I don't see it as being critical to the success in the short run of the cryptocurrency.
But if for my business, for example, if we plugged Stripe in and all you had to do was go accept Bitcoin Cash, accept Bitcoin, just click it, tick boxes. It'd be like, why not? I mean, it's just more ways for people to pay you. But that's more the payment processes infrastructure, I guess. Is that what you meant by that?
And that does happen, right? So again, like I was saying about Coinbase, you could plug them into your site, and if they hate BTC Core, which are having a lot of problems with that, even if they're not advertising it, then then they're going to make that more difficult. They're not going to show it as the default option or anything like that if they're just shooting themselves in the foot. All right, and then finally, the last group, the biggest and maybe most critical in one sense group, is the actual users. So you have the people who are holding it for the long term, who buy it, and it's kind of the speculator angle, except with a bit more insight that, okay, this is not, if it's going up today or tomorrow or down or next week or whatever, not too worried about that. More like, well, in 5 years this is going to be good, or in 10 years, or this is going to be the future of currency, so I should have some integrated into my life to some degree. They're quite important, and that's one area where I can't fault Bitcoin Core, is that I mean, to some extent they've done it to too much of an extent, but they've got the right idea in the sense of you want to have people who are committed to the currency for the long term, are thinking with that long term vision. Let's buy some and hold it, because as that pool expands, that is the bedrock for everything else, right? The price fluctuates up and down, but the speculators sort of are responsible for that top layer of volatility, and then the base is by these users and businesses that are holding the currency, and so that increases over time, which is why the speculation goes like this, but you can draw a solid line at which a point that it never falls back down, because that baseline is slowly building up over time. And I think it's really important for Bitcoin Cash to try and build that same thing. How are we doing for time, by the way, dude? We can we've been going for a while, but we can speed it up.
I will need to wrap up pretty soon.
Okay, all right. Let's just blast through a bit of this. Okay, so I think you do want to try and get users, and again, low fees, important for users, cool tech, important for users, all the kind of stuff we've talked about. So let's just blast through real quickly here then, why people get into cryptocurrency, right? So I've got a list of ideas here, and again, this is roughly the sort of order that it happens. So the first one is ideology, which is if things, the original Bitcoin supporters were all very libertarian focused or anarcho-capitalist, they had these political leanings, small government, this, that, and the other, right? That wasn't sustainable for the long term because you're not going to convert the entire world to one political ideology, but it provided the seed. It's like the seed funding of the currency.
Yeah.
And
I think there's another ideology, another line maybe there for like techno-optimist types. Because I'd put myself in that category. And the reason I'm interested in it and would consider buying them is because, to support these technologies that really could improve how the world works. So.
Yeah, true. Actually, I completely did not even think of that. Maybe I'm not so much in that category. Maybe I'm more in the ideological camp.
Hey, you've been a speculator all along.
It's all a scam. I put this one here of hipsters as well too, because I like the idea that to some extent, I think this is pretty small, but to some extent, some people got in it just to be, I was a sort of first mover. I think that's a different angle on that same idea, right? Is that some people, they like being on the cutting edge. They want to be, and they can say, I was in it before it was cool. Luckily, in this case, you can get rich off that rather than just getting bragging rights. So that's a good aspect. Okay, so then once you've got that, obviously you've got greed. So the classic and speculators all pile in, but also, the developers with the jobs and funding, the miners, they're in it to make money. Businesses, they're obviously in it to make money. Everybody's in it to make money one way or another. And that's actually fine because greed is a very reliable and powerful human force. So you can put a lot of weight on people staying greedy into the future. Very effective method to get adoption. So then you've got solving real use cases, right? So this is again where Bitcoin Core may be struggling and Bitcoin Cash really putting a lot of emphasis is so like Silk Road and drug purchases, WikiLeaks with getting their donations. That was one of the original use cases. Like Kosovo, as you were saying before, that kind of uncensorable transactions or getting money into new places. That's a real use case. If you're in Venezuela or Zimbabwe, your currency is hyperinflating. So having an uncontrolled currency is, beneficial in that sense. Or like in China, where you can only send certain amounts of money in or out of the country, up to caps or with certain restrictions. Well, with cryptocurrency, you can get all around that. So if you have those use cases, that does get more people involved in your currency, and that's quite important to create those curiosity. So obviously, at a certain point, people have just heard about it too many times, and they think, "What is this all about? I'm out of the loop." They have a bit of a look, and hopefully that transitions into either greed or solving a use case, or maybe ideology if they're so inclined. And then, they pick it up from there. And then also you have FOMO, which is just on the later half of the adoption curve. At some point, people realize, wait, I am the last one here. Like, this is really bad. Everybody else is in on this. They know about it, especially if you talk about it and you say, I don't really know about that. And everybody else looks at you like, really? Like, then, that's pretty powerful motivating force for people. And the thing is, that is happening on a global scale, but it only needs to happen in a community, and it can happen one community at a time, which is that one person is the first person to be, I'm all about this, and then the second person gets curious, and then the third person realizes, wait, there's 5 of us in this group, and 2 are already keen, and they get keen, and then the last people just naturally snowball. So for me, I think the point of this podcast again is about education, because if you that is the foundation of all of this, is that if you understand all these kind of things, then you are going to become a more invested metaphorically and literally in the whole project and how it's kind of going on. So yeah, that's really it. So I think I've just got a few memes here for this episode. I thought this was quite good. So this first one is this guy saying, "Hi, my name is Jason." And then the other guy says, "Oh, nice to meet you, Jason." And there's a picture of the second guy, and his brain is basically filled with cryptocurrency. Can't fit the guy's name Jason in there. So then he says, "Say, Jarvis, want to hear about magic internet money?" it's just so true, right? As more and more money, sort of occupies your space, like we were talking about being hardcore and all that. I saw this, I laughed. This is so true, you know.
Yeah.
This is me, and it's funny because in the last panel, you know, the joke is the other guy is a bit like put off, but one kind of aspect of this joke is that you could even have another slide where this guy in the blue shirt is then talking to a guy in the green shirt, and the guy in the blue shirt is the one with cryptocurrency in his brain, right? It's a viral mimetic idea. So, you know, it transfers around like that. So people hear about cryptocurrency and then they get invested enough, they sort of evangelize it. All right, we've got the second one here, which is about hodling, which is at some point cryptocurrency goes into a bubble, and that's a bit of a rite of passage for everyone. So there was this Bitcoin Talk thread way back in the day where this guy misspelled in the title because he was a bit drunk. He said he was on whiskey, but he misspelled hodling as the price was crashing or as it was going up or whatever. It was just a lot of volatility. And so that became sort of a joke in the community about holding, you know, hodling the currency, like, doesn't matter.
Is that where huddle came from?
Yeah, so it was sort of like come hell or high water. It's sort of the idea that I'm in it for the long term.
Yeah.
And this made me laugh as well. There's this photo of Megan Fox, and there's a picture of her looking pretty geeky or whatever in high school, and then, you know, she turned into this like world famous celebrity for you know, her good looks and everything like that, and just. It's just you know, I mean, obviously this is a bit of a ridiculous example, and some people are going to find that funnier than others, right? But it's just the idea that, you know, it pays off in the long run, and that was kind of what I was talking about
long term
before. Like you got to, if you're in cryptocurrency for 1 week, well, it's probably 50-50 whether or not it goes your way. But if you're in it for 5 years, chances are pretty close, you know, 99.9% that you're doing pretty good. So, you know, yeah.
Well, if it ever gets anywhere near, you know, global reserve currency in your lifetime, then it's just going to be. If you had a cent of it now,
yeah,
that's
it exactly.
It's really about that long term.
Yeah.
And that's why I bought my the crypto I did. I really intended just to hold it because I knew the guys and everything, and that's turned out quite well. So.
Yeah. Well, there you go. You know, you haven't been put off. That's good. Good to see you still here, still part of it. And then, yeah, this third one is. I thought this was funny because I was looking this up. It's this meme from, I don't know, when is this? Like the 50s or something like this. But this sort of art of the dad sitting on the couch and his daughter is sitting on his lap. She says, "What did you do?"
It was about the war, I think, the original one. Where were you during the war?
Yeah, exactly. And he says, "What did you do during the coronavirus, Dad?" And he says, "Bought more Bitcoin." And then his son playing on the floor says, "Fucking legend." And I think that, you know, that to me, that's what it's about. I looked this up because I remember I couldn't find it, but about 5 or 6 years ago, there was this meme and it was like this, and the girl is saying, "Why didn't you buy Bitcoin, Dad?" And then maybe he just had like 3 dots or something. It was like, there wasn't really any good comeback to that, which is that, wait a second, I was out of the loop, you know, so-and-so, somebody else, you know, did get involved or they knew about it, but I was that guy that 20 years ago wasn't on the board, or I wasn't with it, and I think that's what it is. I sort of see it as we're going to global currency, and maybe people understand. Maybe it's not even Bitcoin Cash, right? But one way or another, cryptocurrency is pretty unstoppable force as a collective, I would say, and so it's really just about as people understand that, you know, they get more and more involved themselves, really. So yeah. Final note is just on Reddit this morning, present_turn 7021, who I don't know who that is, but happy birthday, turning 30. I just saw a bit of a Bitcoin Cash cake, which looks super tasty, and I was very impressed about that. We've had food on the show before. There was biscuits, I think, on a previous episode, and I just really like this, as this is just, it's a classic case. Somebody's got to be pretty interested for somebody else to think, I'll make their birthday cake themed about that, you know.
Yeah.
It's just those cute kind of things that's what a community should be about, rather than, you know, all the price and speculation, whatever, you know. Yeah. All right, cool. So that's pretty much all I had for today. So yeah, we can have you can donate to the show if you want. I think I'm also going to maybe start a Patreon. This is a bit of an experiment. I'm not convinced that anybody is going to sign up for it, but I didn't think anybody was going to donate and then they did. So I'm going to give it a go. I don't know what the rewards are going to be at this point. I think I'll just have one $5 tier maybe, and the reward will be that you get a shout out at the end of the show or something like that. But I'm going to start that and just see if anybody signs up. If nobody does, well, I'll just let it drop. That's fine. And yeah, do you want to give any shout outs, Matt? Anything you want to say to the Bitcoin Cash community now or in the future? I don't know.
Well, I got a question for
Yeah.
you. I mean, what's the easiest way for me to get some right now?
Well, it depends where you are. You're in
What
Canberra, Australia. The easiest way for you to get some is I'll send you some. Right after this show, I'll send
Yeah,
you some.
yeah.
The second easiest way, if you want to get a more substantial amount, is there is an exchange in Australia called btcmarkets.net that I will put you onto, that you can look up and get involved with them. But yeah, I mean, the easiest way to get cryptocurrency is ask someone to pay you with it. At your job, say, pay me in Bitcoin Cash, please, and then let them sort it out. That's the end goal, right? You get paid money for working. That's where you get money. So that is one way. But yeah, I mean, there's local solutions. It does depend on your area, but I'll put you onto something with that.
All right. Well.
All right. Cool.
Great. Yeah. Thank you very
Well,
much.
yeah, we'll leave it there, and thank you for listening. Until next time.